Welcome everybody to the 8th webinar. It feels really surreal for me to say this because when it started, didn't know that I'll get to this point, but we're hosting the 8th webinar series today. So I am Dr. Ernestine Gayunza. I'm the Associate Dean for Law and Police Studies at York St. John University. So I research on shared parental leave and breastfeeding, but obviously currently working on breastfeeding and its wider benefits. I recently launched a documentary on breastfeeding titled Breastfeeding Not on the Agenda. I know that many of you already would have seen that documentary and have been part of the webinar series, so just to say thank you. But the documentary was highlighting the benefits and challenges of breastfeeding to health, to work, to the economy, and to the environment. It was also highlighting the need for change because unfortunately breastfeeding don't seem to have the recognition and the support that we would have loved it to have. So what the webinar series has been doing is exploring the different aspects of breastfeeding, sharing knowledge, the benefits, the challenges, and again, what it has been doing is highlighting need for change where all the change is required. So all the recordings for the webinar series plus the documentary itself, they all sit on one YouTube channel. You would have had that channel in the Eventbrite when you registered, but if you didn't, please let me know in the Q&A and I will send you the link. Now, today, I am very, very pleased to be hosting this 8th webinar on breastfeeding and the environment. We were supposed, before I introduce our panelists, we were supposed to be having Sally here with us, but unfortunately, Sally is unwell, and Sally is undertaking treatment, and we wish her all the best and hope she recovers soon. But we will be joined by another panelist. I will introduce her when she joins us. She's having a little bit of technical issues. I'm sure we are all aware of technology and its own mind. So when she does arrive, I will introduce her at that point. But we've got Dr. Olaluken Adekola, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Geography at York St. John University. And his research interests lie in sustainable environment. Now, it's for those of you who've watched the documentary, he was a contributor to the documentary, and he will be talking to us today and looking at the aspects of breastfeeding and sustainability and food shortages. So, Olaluken, it's over to you, please.
Thank you, Ernestine, and welcome everyone. I will just see if I can share my screen. I've got a few slides just to use as a guide to the presentation today. Yeah, so it's been interesting speaking to Ernestine about this topic, from which I am still learning as well. So it's a lot of things coming out that I am also learning from this topic, but it will be good to share some of my thoughts and some of the things I've also found out that other researchers are doing, because this area of the link between breastfeeding, environment, sustainability, it's still growing. There's still more studies that are needed, but at the moment, there are a lot of studies that have been conducted and from which we can start identifying areas for change and how we can enhance the environment looking at breastfeeding or formula feeding. So really I'll just be sharing some of my ideas, and I will start off by sharing some quotes from recent studies and what they found regarding the sustainability of formula feeding, but then we can compare that also with breastfeeding and just put both of them side by side. And then I will use a life cycle sort of framework to help us think through the different stages when we look at breastfeeding or formula feeding, and try to see if we can identify some of the environmental issues, the environmental impact at different stages. And finally, I will just show a few slides that will help us to think beyond the production line, but also thinking about other connections between breastfeeding, formula feeding, and the environment or society as a whole. So these are just few quotes that I've picked from some recent studies. So the first one there is a study that compared the impact of breastfeeding directly with formula feeding. And the sort of main headline finding is that the environmental impact comparing 4 months of exclusive feeding with infant formula is up to 72% higher. That's the environmental impact. And environmental impact, they measured in terms of carbon emission, eutrophication, and different other environmental issues that have impact on the environment. So from that study by Andresen, it shows that exclusive breastfeeding is quite much more less environmentally destructive when compared to breastfeeding. Similar findings by Pope et al. When they looked at commercial milk formula, again, the formula feeding has twice the carbon footprint of breastfeeding. And like I'll point out later on, I'm not saying, or research is not saying that breastfeeding doesn't come with its own carbon footprint. It's just that most studies have found that it's quite much more lower when compared to formula feeding. The study by Smith also along the same line, formula, each kilogram of milk formula generated about 4 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And for those that are sort of know a bit about climate change and sustainability, we know carbon dioxide is the main contributor to global warming. And when we talk of global warming, then we have all the impacts that we often see in society today in terms of drought, in terms of flooding. And we can see with formula feeding, it can contribute more CO2 emission to the environment as a form of greenhouse gas. So those are two other studies. The last one is quite interesting. The one by Carlson compared breastfeeding in multiple countries, US, I think Vietnam, I can't remember all the countries, but close to about 8 different countries. So it was a multi-country study, but still found the same thing, that breastfeeding had lower carbon footprint when compared to formula feeding. But I just threw in the last point there, which also have some implication for the environment, but also implication for the babies, because now with formula feeding, which is most likely through polypropylene bottles, let me just use that word. Yeah, I know breast milk can be extracted and put in bottles. Again, maybe topic for discussion from the health perspective, but it's more likely for formula feeding to be through plastic, through the bottle. So again, the sort of talk around microplastics and the implication and the impact that could have on the health and the well-being of the baby. So it shows that about 16.2 million particles per liter found in each bottle that's being produced. So again, just some of the studies existing at the moment.
Sorry, Olalekan, please, there's a request. Could you share it on slideshow so it will make it bigger for people to see, please? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just move to the next slide. So like I said, again, I'm not going to go into details, but some of the studies, one of the ways they've tried to analyze and look at the impact of environmental impact or the sustainability of breastfeeding or formula feeding is using this tool of life cycle analysis. And in its simplest form, life cycle is looking at a product like the formula feed and looking through each stage in the production in terms of raw materials needed, processing, manufacturing, distribution, storage, waste management, recycling, all the product, and how much energy flow goes through this process. And that can help us to identify not just the totality of the environmental impact of either breastfeeding or formula feeding, but in some way it can also help manufacturers to identify stages in the production line that needs the most attention, because it might be that the process of maybe product manufacturing doesn't generate as much environmental impact, but the process of distribution and use might have higher environmental impact. So manufacturers can then concentrate on those stages to try to improve or enhance the status of the environment. So using one of the studies, when we look at the production and infant formula, it's mainly thinking about the recipe or the ingredients. And in this line, we'll be thinking about the milk, the cow milk, most likely. Again, I'm not into the production of formula feed, but most likely it's going to be cow milk. We can start thinking of where that comes from, how much land is required, how are those cows being fed to be able to get the milk from them. Sometimes it might be from wheat, it could be from corn that needs to be maybe from societies where that probably would have gone into household food consumption and sort of competition that could create. Also, it requires things like vegetable oil, lactose. We can think of all those products and where do they come from? How much does it take to get all those products? And the next stage would be to start looking at infant formula processing and packaging. How is it being processed? You can think of the energy use, okay, in terms of maybe the cow milk being skimmed and then being converted. It needs energy, and all the processes, energy consumption and energy use also translates probably to fossil fuel use, again depending on the society, because most societies still depend on fossil fuel as means of energy generation. Then we can start looking at infant formula processing or packaging. Most of the formula, powdered infant formula comes from packaged in tin. Again, that's another layer of a metal, another layer of extraction from the environment, and which could also have some negative impact on the environment. You can also think about the process of making that metal or tin usable within that within the processing stage. And then thirdly, within the production line, we can think of the transportation and distribution, not just in terms of when the finished product, but think of when the milk is being gotten from the farmland. It needs to be transported, probably hundreds of kilometers, even sometimes maybe transboundary, international, and that again leads to a lot of CO2 generation and impact also on the environment. So again, just highlighting some of the steps within that. The second stage that I want to really look at is also looking beyond the production line, but also when the formula feed is being produced, the consumption process in terms of preparing the formula ready for consumption. Again, here, it's probably just to highlight water usage, not an energy usage, water in terms of producing the milk, in terms of sterilization, and also cleaning. And we can think also of energy use within that process as well. But finally, what I want to highlight here is around the waste generated. So all the thing that's been produced, I try to check if there is any program that try to collect those end product of the thing back to be reused, but I couldn't find any. And some of these, again, can lead to impact on the environment because they need to be landfilled or they need to be recycled, again, thinking of energy use and the implication that could have for sustainability. So really, the idea is just to highlight some of those different stages, get us thinking about not just the formula feeding or breastfeeding, but thinking through each of the stages. My thinking, again, from my understanding, I'm not saying, that's not what most researchers are saying, that breast milk is zero greenhouse gas emission. We do recognize that breast milk feeding would also, I mean, from a scientific point of view, will also have some form of additional greenhouse gas emission in its simplest form, and that's the one I could think of and I found in most researches. It's around the mother having to eat more, probably, maybe consuming more food, and that's additional greenhouse gas production. Maybe if they need to eat more, say bread, again, we need to calculate and work out how much that is. Maybe they need to drink, like my wife, Ernestine was asking earlier, we just had a baby 6 months ago. Maybe need to drink a lot of milk, that's more water. I mean, tea, sorry, that's a lot of water and all those. So again, there could be some greenhouse gas emission, but what science have found and what existing researchers have found is that it's no way comparable to what you get from adopting formula feeding. And you can see that from the first slide, where those studies compared directly formula feeding with breast milk feeding. They found in most instances up to 75% environmental impact when it comes to formula feeding when compared to breast milk feeding. So my final thought again, and hopefully this can generate, and there's a lot of linkages between sustainability and breastfeeding or formula feeding we can think of. I've only just highlighted this, and I think the one at the bottom right corner is quite interesting. Sorry, at the top, where the recent Turkey-Syria earthquake, and I found this story about a mom within that catastrophe or environmental disaster, natural disaster in this instance, could still continue feeding even under the rubble. I'm not sure if that would be possible if that child had been constantly, I mean, is being formula fed. And again, we can't see, and thinking more broadly in terms of disaster in this age where earthquakes are happening, or even more climate-induced disasters. We see instances of flooding, displacing households. We've seen extreme heat and things that are displacing households and creating climate-based disasters. And we need to think about the sustainability or ability of those children to keep on having the food and the nutrients that they demand. I think it will be much more difficult if that child is being formula fed relative to if they are being breastfed. And that's another line we can think of. We can also think about the reliability of the milk supply, which is the major or the main raw material. It's susceptible to a lot of economic, political, environmental variables. I do know during the one of the components of formula milk or the powdered milk for kids is vegetable oil, and we know during the Ukraine-Russia war, one of the things that became scarce, especially in the UK, was vegetable oil, which was a major component used for at that stage. Milk prices, formula feed prices goes up in the face of cost of living crisis. That creates a whole ball game of knock-on effect and impact when we look at the implication of that. But there are a lot of other links which we can explore as we discuss further. So I'll just stop there and thank you for.
Thank you so much for that brief talk. Yay, we've got our other panelists here. This is where it can either go really wrong or it could go well. But thank you so much, Olalekan. We'll come back to you with some questions. And again, just to encourage the audience, if you have questions, please put it in the Q&A and we will pick it up after our second panelist has spoken. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce our second panelist to you. And please forgive me if I butcher your name. It's not my intention to get it wrong. But It's Nawal. Is that
That's correct.
so Nawal is correct, but the surname, can you say that for me, please?
It's Nawal Al-Amrani.
Al-Amrani.
I know it's not an easy name to pronounce, so that's absolutely fine.
No, thank you so much for rescuing me with that, and thank you so much for agreeing at short notice to step in for Sally, who is unwell. So thank you so much for being here. So Nawal is an infant feeding lead for Sheffield City Council and working on implementation and maintenance of the UNICEF Baby Friendly Initiative. So she led her organization to achieving the Gold Award. Well done. So Nawal is a breastfeeding, baby feeding initiative qualified leader and works for UNICEF UK. She's an active member of the Infant Feeding Network for Yorkshire and Humber and Feeding and Climate Change subgroup. So Nawal is passionate about promotion and the protection of breastfeeding and achieving best infant feeding and child development outcomes for all children and families. Thank you so much for being here, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Ernestine. And again, apologies to everybody for the delays. I'm here now, so fingers crossed, hopefully the sharing the screen will work well as well. So let me just do that. I'm just going to select my screen. PowerPoint presentation, fingers crossed, hopefully it's that. Well, while I'm trying to just share the screen, because it seems to be a bit problematic, I'm just going to talk a little bit about our group, because I think there have been enough delays just now. So I will try to do two things at once, which is a bit difficult at my age, but I'm sure I will be able to find a way to do that. But just to say, our group, I am part, as I just mentioned, of the National Infant Feeding Network. And as part of the National Infant Feeding Network, we've got a subgroup for Yorkshire and Humber called Breastfeeding and Climate Change. I do appreciate that, breastfeeding is not completely zero in terms of green gases, impact on the environment. Having said that, comparing that to formula milk, like our previous speaker said, is absolutely worth thinking about. I am struggling to share, so I'm just going to carry on and talking through, the work that we've been doing. So first of all, I'd like to say who we are. We are a group of infant feeding leads who are passionate across the region. So we've got people from Barnsley, Leeds, Doncaster and Sheffield. And we came together because we thought we have to raise that awareness. I mean, when it comes to the benefits of breastfeeding, we do know that it's very well established in terms of health outcome for mothers and babies, short-term and long-term. We know that the impact for the society at large as well is quite considerable in terms of decreasing the risks of, illnesses and so on, and therefore, less cost to the NHS, for example. But the other thing that we've never looked and maybe overlooked a little bit is its impact on the environment. And I think with the, latest crisis that we had with COVID, and also the current poverty crisis, we became very much aware that actually there were real issues in terms of the cost implication for families. So we know that, for example, some families, to be able to feed their babies, if they were bottle fed, would have to steal the milk or maybe dilute the milk to give it to their children, which obviously has an impact. So we realized that actually in terms of food security, there was a real impact in terms of not breastfeeding and actually formula feeding. So, so we came together and we thought we have to raise that, and we also have to raise some issues around, the importance of basically climate change. We are not expert in climate change, and we make it very clear when we describe ourselves or talk about our work. But we do know that there is a real crisis around the world. We know that the temperatures have raised the past few years, and the highest recorded one were from 2013 to 2001, which were the hottest years recorded ever since 1880. So we know that there was that issue. We know that breastfeeding doesn't have a direct impact as much as formula milk in terms of the byproducts, for example, of formula milk. Formula milk comes from cow's milk. It is being processed. It is actually described as an ultra processed food. So we know that, you know, it's not necessarily the best for children. We're not trying to demonize formula feeding mothers, because we do know that formula milk has its place. And at some point, babies will need to be formula fed for medical indications. However, the scale at which formula companies are growing, they are expected to grow at a level of $70 billion by 2025 is very scary. So we know that they are growing in size, that there are misleading parents, they are advertising their product, and they are really, you know, making this statement that there's two choices. It's either formula or breast milk, putting them on the same level, and that's the danger. And that's what we try to raise awareness about when we are working with parents, and when we try to raise how climate change and breastfeeding work well together and needs to be part of the discourse, the general discourse around climate change. As a group, we started very, very small. And I think, you know, the reason we wanted to come here, well, I'm kind of covering for Sally, is really to explain that working in a public health world and promoting breastfeeding and protecting breastfeeding from aggressive, misleading marketing of formula milk is really important. But what we wanted to explain to people out there is it is worth investing in that. It is worth working with colleagues in public health, raising that agenda, and this, you know, in return will raise the agenda not just locally but nationally. We have had the opportunity to create a regional event essentially aimed at infant feeding leads initially, because we thought, you know, the agenda needed to be raised within their areas. And also the fact that basically there are different platforms that we could access to raise that that specific topic with local authorities, especially at the moment with the family hubs. We've got more and more opportunities to make some difference, and it's also to protect, you know, any breastfeeding initiatives in terms of providing support for mothers, because the real issue is not only advertisement is very aggressive in the UK, but the other issue that we are facing is that mothers are not getting the support at the right time. So I think pushing this kind of agenda will really validate the importance of breastfeeding, not just as a health outcome initiative, but also as a climate change outcome. It fits in very well with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. It covers few of them. And I think that's quite important as well to remember, you know, when you're working in this environment. I'm not going to speak, especially that I'm struggling to share my presentation. You will have noticed that. And also the previous speaker was absolutely fantastic at highlighting the issues around formula milk and the byproduct and what it takes to have formula milk and what it costs to the environment and the planet. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But the other thing that I wanted to say as infant feeding leads, one of the key points that we are really wanting to put out there and to protect is the importance of the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. So it's a code that regulates the marketing. And I think we have, you know, especially with COVID and the food crisis, we noticed that there were real issues in the regulation around that. And as a local authority that is fully gold awarded or fully accredited with the UNICEF Baby Friendly, we are very lucky in the sense that we abide by the code, and therefore we are extremely careful when it comes to any advertisement on formula so that we protect parents from misleading informations. The other thing that we did as well in terms of, you know, the work that we have been developing is a Padlet. So that has some resources. I will hopefully be able to share it because I can see there's a chat box here. I hope that this at least will be working. And the other thing as well that we have developed, which I will be also signposting people who are listening to this webinar, is a video around breastfeeding and climate change. It is available on the UNICEF Baby Friendly website. If you just go onto UNICEF Baby Friendly website, UK, breastfeeding and climate change, you will find the video that is embedded in there. And that's quite good as well, you know, for people if they wanted to have a look at this. The Padlet that I will be sharing in a minute, as soon as I have it, sorry, was embedded actually in my, it was embedded in my PowerPoint presentation. So I can't even share the link directly. This is when you want to be, you know, very efficient with technology, and then things go a little bit, you know, not as planned. Like you said, it can either go very well or not very well. But anyway, I will share it in a minute. Now I'm just copying the link, and you will have it in the chat box in 1 minute. And also, we have developed some stills that we use when there are specific events. And I think this is quite important as well, you know, for people to be able to use that as a way of promoting breastfeeding and climate change. We have made it free of charge, so people can use the video and can share the link, obviously, on the UNICEF Baby Friendly website. I think that's about it, really, Ernestine. I think the last thing is really, you know, why do we exist as a group and what do we want to make out of it? We would like to speak up and act. We would like to raise the fact that breastfeeding is valuable and it does make an impact, a positive impact on the environment, even if it's not completely nil, but compared to formula, it's drastically much better. The other thing that we would like people to be mindful of is that we are not demonizing formula feeding mothers. We are really, really trying. Thank you very much, Ernestine, for sharing the Padlet. But if you click on any of those tabs, it can take you to some information about it. And there's also our contact details if you wanted to contact us. So it's quite good in terms of, you know, what you need to know and how we've done things. There are some examples in there, you know, if you wanted to do, for example, a press release in your region or anything like that. If you need more information, please contact Sally or myself, Ernestine, if my email address can be shared, that would be fantastic. And just to go back to what I was saying, you know, protecting parents from aggressive marketing. One way to do that is abiding by the International Code of Breast Milk Substitute, and this is part of the UNICEF Baby Friendly initiative. And also investing in breastfeeding support. I know that the investment means money and time and people and capacity, but it does make a difference, because if you catch people at the right time and you give the right support at the right time, then, you know, the impact is quite clear. Involve partners and service providers, NHS, education. We have been accessing, you know, the LA Directorate schools, you know, all these different organizations, you know, to raise that awareness is quite important. Collaborate and link with local and national leaders, and strategies around food, poverty, environment, and sustainability is also a way to increase the discourse around breastfeeding and climate change. And I think that's about it. And I am ever so sorry that I couldn't share the presentation. I hope I didn't bore you too much. And if there's any question that you want to pop in, I'm happy to answer them later on. Thank you, Ernestine.
Thank you so much. That was really good. I mean, like I said at the very beginning, technology has a mind of its own. Although we use it when it decides that I'm not going to work for you, that is technology. But your talk was really interesting. Again, just to encourage the audience, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A. In terms of the link, the Padlet page link that Noel shared, what we'll do is we'll send it to all the participants so they have it, because the chat only works for the panelists, not for everybody. But that information will be sent out. Again, now it's up to you whether the slides you have is something you are comfortable to share with everybody, and if you are, you can send it to us and we will email it out to all the participants.
That's absolutely fine. Just to reassure everybody as well, is the actual PowerPoint presentation is recorded by Sally on the UNICEF Baby Friendly website. So you do have that access as well. I think me coming today was very much about promoting the group and explaining how it is possible to join the discourse around climate change by bringing, breastfeeding, and it matches really well with some of the Sustainable Development Goals that are precisely for that. So so thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I mean, listening to Olalekan and then listening to you, obviously, the impact, the climate impact of infant feeding now generally, it's critical and it's substantial, it's significant. But then how do we get this message to people? Because breastfeeding unfortunately isn't a topic that you hear loosely around the place, particularly in the UK. And then maybe if you think about mothers who've had a baby and maybe needing help with breastfeeding and so on, it's probably because they've already made that decision that they want to breastfeed at that point. But how do we get this message, which is about the wider benefits around breastfeeding? How do we get this message out to people in time, which will then help them to not just know, but maybe also make decisions about how they want to feed their babies? How can we achieve this? Anyway, sorry.
Well, I'm happy to answer this question if it's all right. And I think, the reality is, like you say, by the time they have the baby, they will probably have had made their mind up about how they want to feed. There is loads of work now and development in terms of how can we raise that awareness. We live in the UK. We have one of the lowest breastfeeding rates in the world. We have a very, very heavy legacy of formula feeding, and formula companies are thriving in the UK, and they are extremely clever at advertising their products. So if we wanted to be smarter than them, we need to start much earlier than waiting when a woman is pregnant. So there's some work now to be, approaching the future, thinking about maybe approaching schools, children, making some changes, fundamental changes in terms of breastfeeding and work, women's rights in breastfeeding and sustaining their breastfeeding for longer. Some women have to go back to work and stop breastfeeding. And also there's the reality of now and then. When a woman is pregnant, there are opportunities of doing parent education, of raising that awareness. It is not about pushing breastfeeding down the throat to people. It's really about explaining why it's valuable. Once a woman have made her choice, then she can take it forward and she can get the support at the right time. Now, in terms of the support at the right time, it's about, tracing that journey from antenatal to postnatal and knowing exactly, how we can support women first in a clinical setting in hospital, then in a community setting with health visiting services, and then moving forward to children's centers, and even actually making breastfeeding friendly in the workplaces and in the public places. So there are some initiatives across the country around that. The UNICEF Baby Friendly gives a very good structure in terms of capturing all that and thinking about progression. How can we actually reach out to women? The shocking Embrace reports around Black women being more likely to die within, actually 4 times more likely to die than their white counterparts is really something that we need to take extremely seriously and find out why. And actually, we know that breastfeeding helps in certain ways. We know that if a woman has just given birth, we can prevent postpartum hemorrhages by breastfeeding at birth, giving all the right support at the right time, improving the maternity care for all women, and specifically for women who are more likely to die as per the national reports. So there are, it's not just one solution, I'm afraid. It's really like a patchwork, and we all need to come together. And I think that's why, thank you very much, Ernestine, platforms like that to share the information, and it's quite important to pass the word on further out.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Olalekan, I wondered whether you had a thoughts on this, and given that you are you're a geography lecturer, you teach a lot on sustainability, and I know that food insecurity is part of you and what you teach. I wondered how you think maybe things like this, you can begin to build it into maybe what you teach, or I don't know, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Celestine, and thanks, Nawal. I totally agree with everything Nawal said. Yeah, so some of the things I jot down, it's along what she said already. In terms of raising awareness, it's just doing what you're already doing, Celestine. Just more of this. It needs to be maybe right word around aggressive sort of communication and campaign around this. I know I shared this with you previously. One of the things that's influenced me in terms of choosing with my wife, deciding that we want to breastfeed our babies is campaign I listened to while I was in secondary school. In those days when I was growing up in Nigeria, there was a massive campaign every day, every night on TV. You had this campaign coming about the importance of breastfeeding, and that stuck with me. Now, when I started having my family, I wasn't thinking it twice. So those sort of campaign, I think, will be useful. And that links to the point that you also made around where is the place of this topic in the curriculum? Is there a way of integrating this into the maybe primary school, secondary school, even within the university curriculum? So are there things we can do in that regard that can help people to see these benefits and identify what can be done? But I also think we need to speak to policymakers. One of the things I did before coming here was to look at different countries and looking at their nationally determined contribution. So nationally determined contribution NDCs are voluntary processes that each country are making to say, we are going to reduce CO2 emissions from this sector, we are going to reduce CO2 emissions from this sector. And from all that I've checked, I've not done everything, but from all that I've checked, I found none looking at contribution within that can be reduced within that sector of breastfeeding, formula feeding, and the changes that can be made within that sector. And I won't be surprised if this talk and knowledge of this is very thin and short within policymakers that end up making all the policies that we depend on in society, whether it's been communicated or whether it's been put in curriculum or things. So again, I think we need that aggressive campaigns within society, funding organizations or institutions that are working in this line needs to engage in those campaigns, because I do feel that have a long-term impact, because if we want to get the younger ones, we need to start speaking to them now and not wait until their parents then to start deciding within that 1 year whether they're going to do it or not. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you both for that answer. I am well aware I didn't ask an easy question, but you two handled it really well. Thank you so much. We've got 2 questions in the Q&A. Nawal, one is for you. It says, how and where have you managed to share the messages across other services?
So we have done a regional event where we invited, like talking about politicians, we invited, some of the key people, councillors in local authorities, managers, directors, just to raise that awareness. And I think, like Olale was just saying, there are that issue of maybe it's overseen, like people don't overlooked and people don't really realize that there is a potential of working around that to decrease, the issues around climate change, and breastfeeding is quite important. So we've contacted as well. So you've got different platforms. We've contacted the Green Network, for example, the NHS Green Network. We have submitted some, case studies. We have also approached the UNICEF Baby Friendly, who was interested. As a matter of fact, we are presenting a poster at the conference this year in November 23. We have contacted as well, in our localities within the NHS, our senior managers explaining that, and also the commissioners, because the commissioners are the one who will be decided if they give you the money, to invest in breastfeeding. I mean, breastfeeding is very much at the moment at the top of the list in terms of the national agenda and the government deploying some money towards that. But I think linking up to climate change and linking with your colleagues within the local authorities and the NHS to work on the green agenda is a way forward. I hope I've answered that question, and that person is kind of seeing opportunities and where to contact people to progress that.
Thank you so much, Noel. Thank you. We have a question from Helen. Helen is saying, thanks for these very thought-provoking talks. Are there climate networks in other infant feeding networks around the UK?
Well, we have been contacted by some people in the Southwest region who are doing some work around climate change. I think we have been working on this project for almost 3 years now, and we are thinking maybe moving forward having something that is more like a national network around breastfeeding climate change. But when we've started, I'm not saying that it was all plain sailing. We did have some hurdles, people thinking, but why do you want to do that? You already promote breastfeeding and you already do all sorts of things around breastfeeding. But I think it's really explaining that there is an awareness raising, not just within, policy makers or health professionals, or it's also about members of the public. And that's why we have developed the video and some social media stills to be used in specific events throughout the year. So when there's Earth Day in April or any event that is linked to the environment, on our specific Facebook pages or social media pages, we have a presence around that, around breastfeeding and climate change. So yeah, I hope I didn't veer out of the question.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. I think, Helen, if you're still here, if you feel your question hasn't been answered completely, please drop us a message again, and I will be happy to pick that up. There is a comment and a question in the Q&A. Says, mentioning comms and awareness, research has shown that there is barely any mention or inclusion of breastfeeding in literature for adults and children. And if mentioned, it is negative. Is this something being considered to help normalize, or is there something being considered to normalize breastfeeding? Breastfeeding? Yeah, sorry. I'm using the wrong mouse. If children see it rather than bottles in books, it may be considered an option. Well, that's a very good question, because this thing about bottles everywhere in books, on TV, everywhere, has been an issue I've been thinking about. But yeah, open to any one of our panelists to answer, please.
I would say, yeah, I agree with that. I think the mode of communication is also important. How things are presented go along. So it definitely needs to think beyond bottles. And when we talk of communication, not my area of expertise, we need to think about those we are communicating with, what works for them, what means of communication is the most appropriate. In some of the previous work we've done, we are looking to communicate climate adaptation. And one of the things we did in that instance was to use storytelling and use storytelling approach with children developing and co-developing those stories themselves as a way of educating and creating awareness and communicating to kids about climate adaptation. I can see that means of communication probably can be tweaked and adapted in this type of environment. But yeah, I do agree. If that communication and awareness raising is going to be effective and not really scare away those we are trying to communicate to, we cannot use the traditional mode of communication, like just writing things or drawing pictures. We need to think of those levels, either children, adults, young adults, female, male. We need to bring them into co-designing that mode or means of communication, and that can help to make that communication much more effective.
Thank you so much, Olalekan. I like the idea or the fact that you said we need to co-create how we communicate. I think that's very important because
Absolutely.
there is I think as Nawal said as well, and as what we often see, there's a lot of when they talk about infant feeding, we see a lot of bottles everywhere. And given that the UK is unfortunately dominated by formula feeding, it sends the message that it's all about formula feeding. Nawal, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, yes. I think, thank you very much, Olali. I can see that we can learn a lot from you. And I really liked when you talked about the massive communication campaign when you were a teenager in school. That's absolutely amazing. I think I think communication is key. Normalizing is key. Unfortunately, like you just said, Ernestine, we live in a country where formula is absolutely dominant as a discourse. If you go out there and you want, even if you want to actually buy a card to congratulate for the arrival of a baby, you will come across a baby with a bottle and a dummy, and then it's part and parcel of the whole thing, isn't it? That's how our entrenched formula culture is. I think breastfeeding is highly political, and formula milk and formula companies are extremely powerful in the UK. And unfortunately, when it comes to raising awareness about breastfeeding, it is down to the health sector, the local authorities. We do have some budget, but we do not have the formula companies' budget. They are extremely clever in terms of misleading mothers. One of the things we've noticed very quite clearly during the pandemic, because they could not go out there and promote their product or access, family centers or hospitals to promote their products. They started, going online and creating parenting softwares. So nothing to do with breastfeeding. And that's quite sneaky because, parents would go there and think that it's an interesting thing. You can, have a look at the different stages of pregnancy and so on. And the next thing you know, you've signed up for free information and freebies basically on formula milk and so on. So I think the question is not, do we need it? We definitely need it, but it's really the political angle. So if there are some people out there who want to go and start working, to campaign politically around that, that would be fantastic. There is the all parliamentary group as well, the APPG, that talks about, protecting formula feeding mothers and breastfeeding mothers, etc., to raise that awareness. But there's definitely a political angle that we need to tackle, so that we can have everything falling into place. So I think that's quite an important point as well to remember.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we have our final question before the clock goes ding on us. It's from Helen. She's saying a national network focus on climate change and breastfeeding sounds amazing. Perhaps consider building a coalition with third sectors as well. I think it's for you, Nawal.
Yeah, I think we did consider the third sector. In Sheffield, for example, we've got a very powerful NCT group, and they have done, one of the leaders have done lots of work around climate change. It's definitely something we would consider. I suppose when we started the group, we were almost a little bit shy about it and thinking, let's keep it small with infant feeding leads within and also we do that, we're not paid for that. It's really something we do above and beyond our job, but we are so passionate about it, and we think it needs raising, it needs entering that kind of discourse around climate change. But yes, moving forward, it's definitely something we would be considering. How can we build a stronger network that maybe is more working jointly with colleagues who are still working in the third sector. Absolutely. At the moment, it's literally infant feeding leads in local authorities and NHS Trust. But moving forward, yes, why not?
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Nawal and Olalekan, so much. And thank you to our audience. I can't believe it. It's an hour already. that's what happens each time when I'm doing this. I feel like I'm just starting, or we are just starting and the time is up. I just want to say thank you all so much. Thank you to Olalukan. Thank you to Nawal for being here and for giving this very, very thought-provoking talks and the insights and making us to realize some of the things that actually we've really not thought about. And most importantly, thinking about, so what are we going to do with this? Thank you so much for being here, and I wish you have a great day. I don't know whether it's sunny or gloomy where you are. Mine is gloomy, but thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernestine, for having me.
Thank you, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.